right, so welcome everyone to the AI 2030 Executive Roundtable on shaping responsible and fair AI development in the financial industry, organized by FinTech for Good and AI 2030. I'm Anastasia Tracy Raices, and I am honored to take on the role of moderator for today's Executive Roundtable discussion. This session is part of the broader series of AI 2030 Executive Roundtables, which is a platform dedicated to fostering a collaborative space where luminaries from diverse sectors converge to shape the trajectory of AI development. The potential of AI to revolutionize business operations is undeniable. Its capacity to streamline operations, enhance efficiency, optimize customer interactions, deliver personalized experiences, and so much more presents innovative, disruptive, and transformative opportunities along with pressing responsibilities. By bringing together thought leaders from government agencies, academia, industry, and diverse sectors, AI 2030 seeks to be an initiative that steers the transformative power of AI towards benefiting humanity while mitigating its potential negative impacts. The crux of this initiative is the synergy between public and private realms, working hand in hand to ensure AI's development remains responsible and equitable. Moreover, today's session holds special significance to a lot of us as we celebrate women's leadership in the AI industry. These visionary experts on today's panel, who stand at the forefront of AI and finance, are here to share their knowledge and experiences and visions for a future AI that is not only groundbreaking, but also responsible and equitable in the financial industry. We have a great panel of distinguished speakers today. Their insights will undeniably light the way to an enlightening and impactful and very fun conversation, I'm sure. Thank you all for joining us. And why don't we start with some introductions? So let's do this in alphabetical order, and let's start with Christina.
Hi, thank you. Yes, it's great to be here. Hi, everyone. Christina Trampota, Managing Director of Innovate Growth Scale. What I bring to the team is a diverse background, especially in the areas of digital channels and marketing, as well as fintech, having worked across the industry from the payment networks to banks to a lot of scrappy startups. And so I've built a lot of things 0 to 1, worked through different mix of regulatory environments, as well as the global customer base. So excited to be here. Thank you.
Great. Marianne?
Hi, I'm Marianne Winslet, and I'm with R3I Ventures. We are a venture capital company that specializes in deep tech, and we like to leverage underfunded communities, which in the deep tech world actually is primarily women. That's the biggest single underfunded contingent. But we also specialize in people who are underfunded because of geographic reasons. They don't live in Silicon Valley. They may be extremely far from Silicon Valley. And I've seen myself referred to as every possible type of partner at R3I. We're a young and new company, so we all play a lot of roles. Before that, I spent 30-some years as a professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And my research specialties there were data security and privacy and high-performance computing.
Wow, wonderful. Michaela.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here in such great company. I am also a recovering academic with a PhD in robotics, and guess what? Yes, it is animated by artificial intelligence and robotics because robots have to collaborate, cooperate, work together. Yes, they are mainly animated by my area of expertise, which is distributed artificial intelligence. And so I moved out of academia after conquering it as a tenured professor and research chair. I moved out because I really loved startups. I wanted to support them. And I'm advising several startups in artificial intelligence. I think most relevant for this conversation, I am working with SingularityNet. I'm their chief AI alchemist. I'm also president of the Impact Institute for the Digital Economy. Thank you so much. I look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. And Phaedra.
Hello, my name is Phaedra Boinadiris. I am IBM Consulting's Global Lead for Responsible AI. I also serve as a member of IBM's own AI Ethics Board, and I lead our Trustworthy AI Center of Excellence. I'm almost done with my PhD on the subject of AI ethics. And I also devote a lot of my volunteer time to curating curriculum for kindergarten through 12th grade on the subject of data and AI ethics. So I'm so pleased to be here.
Very relevant, the use of AI in education. So that's awesome. All right. So as you can all see, we have a great panel. I'm really looking forward to these discussion questions. So why don't we start with the very first one, which is focused on what's currently happening out there in the financial industry. So can you provide a few compelling examples of how AI is currently reshaping and transforming various aspects of the financial industry? And why don't we start with Christina on that one?
Yes, great question. I think there are a number of areas where this is already being applied. Some we might not even realize actually have been AI for some time. So it isn't necessarily something that, oh, it just started now this year, very recent. So I'm going to name off a few that I hope a number of you listening in and participating in today's event here can relate to as well. Because let's think, first of all, there's the general customer service engagement. There's a number of financial institutions that have those. Some have already been working with that. In the previous days, we could just say it was a chatbot, but those are increasing in the intelligence and the information. But at the same time, they have those, I would say, security guards in place, because if it's going to be on a regulated financial institution's website, you know, it is definitely built in a different manner as to what they can answer, what they can provide, and where those different layers are. And the other one I'd love to highlight would be advising. The area I think this is accelerating very quickly is also in, they call it robo-advisors, which for those who might or might not know if it's applied to you, a lot of decisions are there. They decide how they're going to balance your accounts. They might reallocate things for you. They can help you find the best investments. And whether you look at an early stage fintech or others, it is there. Let's see, the expectation by the end of 2023, I found in some research that robo-advisors were expected to manage 2.8 trillion. So this continues to grow and accelerate on as you go and things continue to advance. And I think especially not only the information of what they provide, but I think the operational efficiencies they bring will continue to see. I'll pause there. We could go on forever, but I'd love to hear what the others think and see where we can mix this up.
Yeah, that would be great. Anyone else have any other comments, any additions?
My internet lapsed for a little, so I'm not sure I heard all of it, but I was curious if, sorry, the prior speaker talked about, so fraud prediction, credit risk scoring. These are some other applications of artificial intelligence that we've been seeing within the fintech community. I'm sorry if you've already said this, my apologies.
No, it's new. It goes right in there, so go for it.
Great.
Yeah.
Additionally, with generative AI, automatically creating personalized emails, summarizing things like earnings documents, summarizing, for example, regulatory changes. I know there have been some implementations using generative AI for things like KYC, know your customer. You know, just off the top of my head, some ideas.
Okay. Marianne, Michaela, any additional comments, any observations of what's going on out there now?
The obvious are the chatbots, yes, and hopefully they're going to be more intelligent. So far, I'm not very happy with what's happening, but we are working on it. And there are also novel methods for expanding access to credit for individuals who may have been overlooked by the traditional methods. For example, artificial intelligence and distributed artificial intelligence in particular, which actually is running on distributed infrastructure like blockchain or other infrastructures for that matter, they can enable that through smart contracts, because the financial institutions can have more trust that actually they will be paid back if a contract automatically happens at a certain time. And of course, robo-advisors were mentioned, but I just wanted to mention that also in the more, let's say, anarchist world of crypto, we are working on Singularity DAO, which is an algorithmic trading robo-advisor, personalized for the people, and on other novel methods for funding innovation, which enable people to vote on various proposals and decide which startups will be funded. And again, artificial intelligence has a say here.
Marianne, anything to add?
Great summary from everybody else. I don't have anything to add.
So AI is currently having a profound impact on the financial industry and performing transforming ways they're doing businesses, from enhancing efficiency, improving customer experiences, and enabling more data-driven decision-making. That's what I'm hearing. But another effect of that is the aspect of financial inclusion. It's allowing for alternative credit scoring, as an example, since you can get in with additional data points. And it's making certain other things more accessible, like financial education, as an example. So very, very good. Some really great examples. Let's move on to the second question. Why is fair and responsible development of AI particularly significant for the financial institutions? How does it impact, if at all, customer trust or regulatory compliance, and just the overall industry sustainability? Let's see, who can answer that first? Mihaela, how about?
Yes, I think that's right up my alley, because SingularityNet's mission is actually to deploy the fair and responsible singularity. So when artificial intelligence will become equal or smarter than with the people, I think it's essential to serve us. And I'd like to start by underlining what fair and responsible AI means, and then I will adapt it to financial services, because the same principles apply. So actually, and I also want to inform everyone that we are really working on fair and responsible AI, and we are going to have the first beneficial AI summit, which will be at the end of February, beginning of March 2024. So please follow the announcements. So the principles, as I mentioned, and of course they are not finalized. That's why we need the summit, and we need to engage everyone in the conversation, as you, Tracy, mentioned, private and public discussions. Of course, human-centric approach, prioritizing the well-being and interests of humans, should be at the core of the design of artificial intelligence, and of course also for the financial sector. What is beneficence? I mean, it's not, probably not everybody has the same idea about that. For us, it means that AI should aim to maximize the positive impact on individuals and society as a whole. It should be used to enhance human capabilities, human flourishing, improve quality of life, and address, of course, the global challenges, as we call it, the meta crisis. Fairness and equality, transparency. Of course, it's important for us to understand how AI is working, as well as to understand if it is abusing our personal information. And there are many more, of course, privacy, data security, but let me move to the financial sector. Of course, AI is crucial to be beneficial and fair and responsible for the financial institutions to maintain customer trust in the first place, to comply with regulations, to manage risks, to enhance the customer experiences. And I think all the examples which were given in the previous question are mirroring what I'm saying. So again, all these principles, yes, the fairness of systems, the transparencies, elimination of biases, so that everybody can get the credit without any biases, and so on and so forth, and personalization. All these are absolutely critical in the financial for the financial sector to apply artificial intelligence for us, with the people, and to put AI in the service of mankind.
Very well said. Anyone want to follow up?
I'd love to jump in. I think of how important it is, coming from financial and fintech industry, that trust and safety is an assumed, right? It is a must-have. It isn't a nice-to-have. And so in that industry, the users have to have that trust, that sense of security in order to keep their business there. We saw that not only with fintechs, where almost 90% of traditional financial institutions are constantly still concerned about losing some of their business to fintechs, because they were already using some of these newer models, ways of enabling credit, offering them a new offering, allowing them to join and have some sort of financial service where perhaps they were not before. However, I want to also address the compliance side, because as someone who's built a number of products in the industry, that is something that we cannot forget. Even being in Web3 world, there still is compliance, right? Because if you're going to go through and deal with any type of personal information, PII world, whether it's their personal information, their credit score, their KYC check, all these sorts of things that you are creating in your new score or new way of identifying, you have to know where this is. And I think the thing we must pay attention to is knowing that these AI solutions are moving so fast and rapid. It's exciting, but also having worked with the industry so much, the AI industry is going to move much faster than the financial industry all the times. So what do we need to do? And I mean, I can give some answers, but I'd love to prompt that and see if others have a comment, right? As there are so many existing regulations, we can't forget about that. You have to follow that for fair lending, things you have to file, privacy ones like GDPR, CCPA. There's so many different ones, Fair Lending Act. And as you go into different countries, you just go down the list. There's a new acronym to use. So I'm sorry, I know I didn't name them all, but what do the others think?
Oh, you're absolutely right. And innovation always goes at a pace faster than the regulations change. So compliance officers, and I being a former one, so I really appreciate that you brought up compliance. We're always trying to interpret or extrapolate what the intention is. And many times I've told my customers the same product can be regulated in one country and not regulated in another. You have to focus on what your risks are and doing the right thing, and do that, because it would be better for you to do that than to wait for regulation to come in, and then the regulation might not be at all what you really wanted it to be. So great bringing that up. But I'm the moderator. I shouldn't be commenting. So I'd like to hear from the panel.
We want you to comment. You're a wealth of information. So yes, please do comment. Just, I think much has already been said. I would add that earning trust in AI is not a technical problem with a technical solution. It is a socio-technical problem, which means you need to have a holistic approach, right? You've got to be thinking about what is the right organizational culture to create AI responsibly, right? And with that, there's all kinds of things, including making sure you indeed have a diverse and multidisciplinary group of human beings actually developing AI with different lived world experiences. You need the right AI governance processes, safeguard rails in place. You need the right tools and AI engineering frameworks. And then when you're talking about, you mentioned fairness, even that, I mean, people can say, of course, we need our AI models to be fair, but what I think is fair might not be what you think is fair. So actually, granularly as an organization stating, here is our worldview on fairness. Here's how we expect this worldview on fairness to show up in our AI models and in the processes around our AI models. And then even beyond that, stating your principles around things like fairness and explainability and transparency, et cetera. It's one thing to state the principles, and it's something very different to operationalize them throughout an entire AI life cycle. So that's, why we're saying things like, it's not a technical problem with a technical solution, but something truly that you need to approach holistically.
I love that example. And it reminds me that there are 70 years of science fiction built on looking at what happens when you have a few perfectly reasonable rules about proper behavior and how often they seem to conflict with each other. And do you have any comments about that?
I love that you're bringing up science fiction. Like, yes. Isn't it wonderful that we have something like science fiction that can give us ways of thinking about technology in various future states, sometimes quite near future. But yeah, there definitely are conflicts. There are conflicts, and like I said, there can be cultural tensions. For example, we talked about AI governance processes, in particular for chief risk and compliance officers. One of the common mechanisms that chief risk and compliance officers use for AI governance is like a risk assessment form that you expect AI model owners to fill out, right? Like, did you watch the training about fairness and explainability? Look, what's the description of the use case of your model? Talk about how you are addressing potential bias or disparate impact in your model. What we found working with different clients is that even if people watch the training, even if people can state, here's our principles, here's our pillars, they have a very difficult time associating those principles with their particular use case. So they might say something like, why do I need to worry about fairness or bias in my model if I'm not gathering any personal information? And this goes across role, across geography, across gender, even across education. So what I'm noticing, and again, why I keep emphasizing socio-technical challenge, is that so oftentimes our technical practitioners do not understand the subject of disparate impact and risk.
Yes, and this inspired me just to add one more thing, which is more on the technical side because we are working on it. And it has to do with this distributed artificial intelligence. So we are working on an infrastructure that enables the personal data, speaking of personalized and personal data, which needs to be available, but also so we can process personal data from each and every one that is out there, each and every person, but keep it also private. So at the very granular level, we are developing what we call the Internet of AI that would enable that. We're hoping that we will achieve it very soon because, as you mentioned, it's absolutely needed for the beneficial aspect of AI.
And I wanted to bring up one last thing that kind of links with that and some of the other comments, and that is, this is something that's for businesses of all types. I think sometimes people feel, oh, well, I'm not in the financial industry, right? Well, if you take any type of payment processing, any sort of transaction that you might manage in your business too, think of where some of these also cross over in there, and basic PCI compliance, the payments, right? If you just have any of that running through your business, you might literally need to look into this through a different eye and make sure you are being fair. And if you are in the fintech sector specifically, and you're going after a new audience, don't forget, a lot of the regulatory side actually comes later. So you see all these companies that might create something for those that could not qualify before, but then later they're being penalized a couple of years down the path, right? The regulatory bodies are coming back and finding them because they find that something they did, whether it was through their marketing practice or the type of data management practice they were doing, or how they were framing something or recommending one versus the other. This has been around before, but I would say now with AI, it's just going to accelerate because there's so much information. And so I think what's catching a lot of people's attention in the industry is the pace of this, right? And I hope, Tracy, you appreciate this, is one comment I heard at an event recently was, will there be an AI compliance officer now? So I think in some of these organizations that are heavily regulated, like the financial industry, we will probably see someone who has that special focus, because this will start crossing over so many different areas that they will probably want somebody, if there isn't already, but whether they create a great title like that or however they define it.
And
I hope they
maybe
do.
we will work on this job description for that kind of person
Right?
at our beneficial AI summit, where I invite all of you. It's clear you belong. So
I'd like to follow up with one more question. I figure if Tracy's acting like a panelist, I can act like a moderator. So when we talk about how techies, they're unable to see how their little statistical thing ties to these ethical issues, what's the best approach that you know of to help them think in terms of impact, ethics, fairness, when it comes to their very technical work? Have you found something that works?
I'll tell you what I'm trying right now. So I mentioned I lead our Trustworthy AI Center of Excellence. So we created this community, and we said at the onset, like, I don't care what your background is. I don't care that you're an anthropologist by trade, a sociologist, a designer, a psychologist, don't have a background in data scientist. It doesn't matter. You're welcome here, because we need so many different skill sets, competencies, lived world experiences. Again, a truly multidisciplinary group of people working on this challenge. Because as you heard earlier, the purpose of AI is not meant to displace people or have control over people. It's meant to augment human intelligence. So we desperately need people trained to think about, what is the experience like of a human if they've been augmented by by artificial intelligence. So we offer not just asynchronous and synchronous training across different job roles, but more importantly, applied training. And of all the different forms of training, I have found that the applied training actually helps with the stickiness, because we say, as you do these kinds of projects on the subject of responsible curation of AI, you are going to work in diverse, multidisciplinary teams, thinking through things like disparate impact, safeguard rails, how do you empower people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that truly is one way in which people are getting epiphanies. Setting up these communities of practice and emphasizing the principles and how to operationalize through these principles throughout the AI lifecycle, not just with respect to what you're saying and what you're teaching, but also what kinds of behaviors in the organization you're incentivizing. This is what is key. So we've actually, taken these kinds of best practices, and we're helping our clients with this now too.
And fantastic. And just to take on from here, because you inspired me, we are actually working on an AI constitution together with the Earthwise Center. And it is, of course, critical. And it has all the ingredients which you mentioned, including, of course, accessibility, that everybody can participate in the development as well as access it, but also to keep their data private while contributing their information.
Okay. Right. So I'm going to act as a panelist really fast, since we switched roles just for a couple minutes. But I've been on both sides. I've been on the side of the product development, and I've been on the side of the working with the engineers. And regardless of company, regardless of industry, a lot of people are, we're human. We tend to stay in our little swim lanes. We have our little silos, and we think about our little world. And it's very easy to not see the bigger picture. One of the best mechanisms that I've ever seen to get you out of your own swim lane, to see that bigger picture, is what's called a PRFAQ, a working backwards PRFAQ. And that is literally what it sounds like: a press release and an FAQ attached to it, a mock one. And you write that as if this, whatever it is that you're working on, is going to make it into the newspaper. So what is it that you want to make it into the newspaper? What's that customer experience? What does that look like to the end customer? Because you can get really, pigeonholed and rattled and just look at your swim lane and just focus on the technology aspect of it. And of course, you're going to say, I don't see the connection with the financial inclusion. Of course, my model isn't biased. It's a model. It's a computer. It's not biased. People are. Computers aren't. And they're not realizing that the inherent human biases can make it into the model. So, forcing someone to contribute to a PRFAQ of what that end state looks like helps get somebody out and see that bigger picture. So that's a mechanism that I've used, and it really does work wonders in having that conversation, because ultimately that's what it does come down to. We all learn from each other, just like I'm learning today from you. We all learn from each other, and having that conversation to prepare that document is a fantastic exercise.
I like these examples because it reminds me of the agony that big companies went through trying to get their software engineers to think about security. Security used to be just the domain of experts, but you can't come in at the end as a security expert and then make the system secure. It's impossible. So they had to train the software engineers to think about security from the beginning. And it sounds like you're kind of saying the same thing here. You've got to get your engineers to be thinking about it from the beginning and understanding it in a deeper way. And I like the concept of a press release, ideally a very negative one, to motivate people to not see their names on the front page of the paper.
Well, you mentioned an important point about unconscious bias proliferating into our systems. I think getting people to understand, the nature of data itself, that it's an artifact of the human experience. We humans, we make the data, the machines that make the data, and we humans are fallible with 188 biases and counting. So getting people to understand, yes, our data is biased. The key to transparency is saying, here's what our biases are. Being brave enough and introspective enough to look at AI, which reflects our biases. If we are okay and they align with our values, those biases, we're transparent and we say, here's how our AI model is biased. If we don't like what we see in that mirror, that's when we need to change. And I mentioned the importance of bravery, being brave enough to be introspective, being brave enough to do something like an audit of your model to understand which biases are not okay. I mean, there's so many examples in the news. For example, the country of Spain, there was a region there that had procured an AI model to predict the level of recidivism of domestic abusers. It was being used by a police department there, and it was only after 19 women were murdered that had gone through the system that they did an audit. And of course, it begged the question, is this the right use case for artificial intelligence? Who was in the room when deciding that this was a good use case, et cetera, et cetera. But, it definitely, that audit reflected back, here's the bias that does not align with the values of this particular police department. Anyway, so, to get people to understand the fundamental nature of data and why it's so important to work with those with domain expertise, I think is really key.
That's a very good point. And did it really have to take 19, a number of 19? Could it have been done earlier?
Yeah. Yes. And it turned out their bias, what they found was that the bias was that they had assumed if a complaint was coming from a wealthier household, that they could lower the risk. And so the score that the police were determining whether to put a protective order in place or not, the score was lower if the complaint came from a wealthy household.
So only rich women approximately were getting murdered under this. That bias would hit the paper quicker than if it was only poor women. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
I just want to take a quick just make a comment to the audience. We're having a really great discussion, and this isn't that formal that I'm the only one that's allowed to ask questions. That's obvious at this point. So please feel free to, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat if you have any question of any one of us on this panel. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that out there. All right, sorry. So Marianne, go ahead. You were about to say.
Saying the same thing, but in a way that the techies might get, well, not quite the same thing. It's just AI is based on the perception of patterns and data. And if these patterns are not, it doesn't fit in the Spanish case, but in general, if these patterns are not things that we're proud of, are they things that we want to be perpetuating? Because there are ways to engineer them out of the resulting model, but it takes extra time and effort.
That is a great segue to the next question, which I think you might want to continue on. So could you elaborate on the latest developments in responsible AI, including any regulatory measures or industry frameworks, notable technological advancements that are influencing the approach?
Well, the big one is something certainly all our panelists know a lot about, the EU AI Act. And that's important for the whole world, not just the EU, because big companies build things that they want to sell everywhere. They don't want to build special tailored ones for each geographic distribution, each geographic location. So what the EU decides to do has an outsized impact on what providers are going to build. And the act is, I put a link to it over in the chat, but it's easy to find just on Google. And I wanted to point to a research that I think might not be as well known in our audience. I put 3 links to it at the top of the chat, but my chat doesn't seem to scroll. That's unfortunate. It's scrolled right off the chat. But up at the top, I put 3 links to things that the Stanford Center for Responsible Foundation Models has done. And I put a link to the homepage for that on GitHub. They've built what they call the Foundation Model Transparency Index. And they worked off of the EU AI Act to identify the key provisions in the Act that apply to the large language models that people are building now. And that is the most Wild West area of computer science right now. These things are useful, but they're not based on any mathematical foundation, unlike other statistical techniques. So they're using statistics without really any understanding of statistics. So these systems often work well, but when they work badly, they work really, really badly. So the Stanford Center came up with this Foundation Model Transparency Index, which you can read about there, based on what the EU AI Act was asking. And I put a link specifically to the results, which is this nice matrix that shows, I guess we could say maybe the leading foundation models from OpenAI and Coherence, Stability, that one's different, Anthropic, Google, and so on, and rated them on, do we know what data they were trained on? How well is this data vetted? Is it based on copyrighted data? That's becoming more and more sensitive. What are the compute requirements to come up with them? Because right now the compute requirements to come up with a good foundation model are sky high, but I don't think that'll last forever. And because compute requirements are so high, they're energy hogs. So the models are all rated on their energy use. How well did we understand the capabilities and limitations, the risks, the mitigations? How well have they been evaluated, tested, blah, 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 it goes on. And I thought this was very nice because it gives a score to each model. And the highest one went to one that I personally don't know anything about, which is Bloom from Big Science. They seem to have taken a little more care than the others. So I thought this scorecard could potentially both be a motivational tool and something useful for potential clients when they're thinking about which systems fit best with my business, given that they have a great deal of overlap in capabilities in the case of text-oriented models. So I want to point that one out. Maybe we have some comments from the other panelists.
Because this scorecard that you mentioned idea just brings me to think about another thing where scorecards are useful, and AI can help in determining them, the value of these scorecards. Sustainable finance, which is very, very connected to beneficial AI, and AI is playing an important role. So sustainable finance being the integration of all these ESG factors into the financial decision-making processes, with investing, lending, providing financial services in a way that takes into account not only the returns, but also the broader impact on society, the environment, and the corporate governance practices. And where actually AI can help here, both in the environmental and social sustainability, is in advancing this, like, for example, ESG data analysis, where we can determine, and that's the scorecard, right? I mean, what is the score that an endeavor is obtaining, depending on how the impact on the environment as well as on people's life. AI can also help us with quantifying and measuring this impact, yes, environmental and social impact. It's not easy to measure the impact of our investments on the world. And as we know, yes, I mean, there are so many examples, more examples impacting negatively than positively at the moment. Fraud detection was mentioned already, and you mentioned NLPs, and this is quite relevant also for sustainable finance, because you can analyze a plethora of information and data and gauge public sentiment, track a company's reputation, identify potential ESG related risks or opportunities. Green bonds are other means in which sustainable finance can manifest and contribute to this scorecard.
Okay.
I want to bring up a challenge, I think, that's out there, if that's okay. And I would say all of these standards and rules and guidelines are great, but when you look at an industry like financial or insurance, anything that kind of goes in the broader space of some sort of payment or money, I would say, how do you continue to address this? And that's why I dropped the idea of continuous improvement, right? Because not all of the data you have represents necessarily who you're trying to serve. And this is especially true when you're looking at the underserved population, underbanked, non-banked. I've built products before for the groups that don't have IDs, right? The ones that don't have any kind of credit score like you have in a country like the US. And there are a number of creative ways that they already create models and scores and all of that. But imagine how you're going to have to, again, I am clearly not your data scientist, but I'm more on the product side, how that model will have to be updated, because you don't want it to only learn as to who should be approved based on data in the last 10 years. Some generations now don't even use credit, even in a market like the US, right? So then you have different things as this changes across generations, regions, that just to kind of throw that out there, it's going to be an ongoing, it will need to constantly learn and evolve and kind of be checked, right? With all of the guidelines that the others mentioned, because what they did initially will likely not work as soon as just even next month. Things change so quickly. Thoughts?
Oh, 100% agree. What you're talking about is, having AI better reflect the communities that it serves, like 100%. And that includes things like earning people's trust, like rendering those AI. First of all, telling somebody when you're using artificial intelligence. Let's just start there. You're using an AI to help determine somebody's interest rate on a loan. You better damn well tell them, and then make that model transparent and interpretable to that subject, meaning don't use gorpy math-splaining speech, right? Say, here's the expertise behind this model, here's what data we're taking about you, to determine what percentage interest rate you're getting on your loan. Here's who's accountable for this model. Oh, we got to have accountability. Here's how much better this AI model performs compared to a human being. Here's what we audited the AI model on with respect to things like bias, et cetera, et cetera. Then making sure that as let's say you're using generative AI, and I know Ben had this question in the chat, let's say you're using generative AI to have a conversation with people, those outputs also need to be auditable and explainable, which means you need to pair a large language model with something like semantic search or a formal knowledge graph like an ontology. You need to have content grounding with a large language model. So you're using the large language model to come up with all the different variations on language, but for ground truth, you're going to a carefully curated, trusted sources of data. So in your output, you say, here's how I know what I know. Do you see what I'm saying? That this, again, is an incredibly important way if you establish that explainability and things like fairness and transparency are part of your core principles as an organization. You have to have it be exemplified in how you use artificial intelligence, including something like generative AI.
I totally agree. Actually, I think it was New York State that recently passed a law saying that if AI is used to review employment applications, that it needs to be disclosed to the applicants, and there needs to be a way to audit the model to ensure that there's not some sort of bias built into, the selection of the candidates that are going to move forward for an interview. I thought that was groundbreaking when I saw that.
Yeah, and opt out, like human in the loop.
Mhm.
I don't want to use that AI.
Yeah.
I'm opting out. I want a person to review my application.
Right. Exactly. So I think that's very important. And then you touched upon the chat discussions. I think it's come up more than once, the chat discussions with the financial advisors. More and more, we're seeing a lot of financial institutions being fined for having discussions with their clients outside of the normal, whatever it is, the communication channels. I think most recently there was a bank that was fined for conversations that were being had with clients on WhatsApp. I mean, again, regulation not catching up to technology and what's being used. I can see a lot of potential discussions around the use of the chat boxes and the generative AI when it comes to that financial advice and what's being communicated to the customer. So excellent conversation.
Let me answer at least one of the questions from the chat. Someone asked, why was Microsoft Bing not included in the evaluation? And it was, they use OpenAI, which is the leftmost column. So you'd look at GPT-4 for that system. And I'll also talk just a little bit about the future from a technical point of view. So generative AI made it into products really, really quickly. The technology didn't even exist at all before 2017, and this is only 5 years later. So all of these things we're talking about, from the energy to bias mitigation and explainability, they're hot topics of research right now in the computer science research world. This is good news, but it's also bad news, because it would be much better if we gotten to the point where these were not hot topics of research, because there's so many obvious problems and issues, just even starting from the fact that they're total energy hogs, just ridiculous, especially in the case of OpenAI, which believes that bigger is better. And then going on to the kinds of things we're talking about that directly impact the customer. So the good news is that scientists are working hard on improving all of these things, and that will also help democratize the use of these models, which right now are just super expensive to build. But on the other hand, it's not ready for prime time. And then we had another question in the chat. Can we make AI models that are using generative AI auditable and explainable? Can we make them completely transparent? And I would say this is my personal opinion, not shared by all computer scientists. No, because there's no strong foundation. There's no principles that they're built upon. They're just something you put together and it works.
I just wanted to give that person a bit of hope, because we are working on that with neural symbolic reasoning methods. And we have Zarka, which is a startup.
Wait, let me finish. But I believe that everything that's being done with these techniques can actually be done with principled techniques that are transparent and explainable. And I believe that eventually it will be, because these things do such stupid outputs that in unpredictable times and places, that there will be a continual push, and there already is, to replicate their abilities using a much more principled foundation. Now, let's hear about this more principled foundation.
I think that question is to you, Michaela.
I was answering the question, which is about if we can design systems, AI systems that can actually explain what they do. And so we are working, we have a startup called Zarka. You can find it if you anywhere actually, which is developing distributed large language models based on the principles which I mentioned before, neural symbolic reasoning, in which data is aggregated in a distributed manner and preserving the privacy. So yes, it is possible to develop explainable AI, and which you can track every step of the processing. And you can also look at Hypercycle, which is our infrastructure that I was mentioning, which is the Internet of Artificial Intelligence that actually is dealing with that, as well as Nunet, another startup which we are developing. So we have several approaches because we have to attack this frontal, as the previous speakers mentioned. So we are hoping that by next year, or maybe 2025 latest, we're going to come out with the singularity designed for the beneficial of for the benefit of humanity. So the beneficial AGI, if I may.
This has definitely been a journey. It was only a few years ago that I was asking questions around some artificial intelligence, machine learning models, and I was told that the creator of the model could not explain it to me effectively, because in order for me to understand what he was talking about, I needed a PhD. We are worlds away from that now. Only a few years later, where we're talking about the transparency of these models and understandability and explainability of these models. So we're worlds away, but it's from where we started. But it was definitely a journey to get to this point, for sure. I do want to move on to the next question. So financial institutions face complex choices when advancing AI responsibly. Could you discuss the range of options that are available to these organizations, considering factors such as ethical consideration, data privacy, effective risk management, and the likes? And I'd like to throw this question to Phaedra.
When you look at the entire sphere of AI governance, what I see is two sides of a coin. One is there's automated AI model governance, so using tools in order to run things like audits of the models. And then there's organizational AI governance. Both serve different kinds of stakeholders within an organization. So different kinds of stakeholders have enough power to pull off the things that need to happen on both sides of this coin, right? Typically, the AI model owners or the heads of artificial intelligence within organizations have the power to do things like audit their models or create stand up a set of tools to do things like mine for bias within data sets and crank out fact sheets or AI model cards. Organizational AI governance, on the other hand, the outputs of something like this is establishing principles for the organization, standing up an AI ethics board, coming up with like, what are the governance processes so that if you find something that's objectionable as an output of a model, let's say you find bias in that AI model that's cranking out credit risk scores for the historically underserved, like what are the processes that need to be in place for that organization to be able to tackle such a thing? And again, both of these areas are incredibly important, but both have totally different stakeholders that need power. And so what I'm finding is, especially within fintech organizations, we're seeing a tremendous amount of interest in installing tools to do things like the AI model audits, but less of an appetite to do the organizational AI governance so that there's communication, education, the AI ethics board, the processes in place to make sure that when the audits find something objectionable, that there's actually a procedure to follow, that there's actually education and communication in place to get practitioners to understand how to operationalize principles. So I think it's incredibly important as practitioners in this trade that we recognize the critical importance of both of these, because you can't just use, again, it's not a technical problem. It's not a technical problem with a technical solution. Even just being able to configure these auditing tools to know like what to look for with respect to fairness is going to take a lot of introspection. As I said earlier, like what are the values of this particular organization? How do you quantify something like fairness? What is important to put in something like an AI model card or a fact sheet? How do you make these interpretable? Does this really augment human intelligence? Like all of these things these conversations need to happen necessarily within an organization at the right stakeholder level.
Wow. Now, how do you empower those people to speak up?
So a lot of that groundwork needs to happen with, what we call stakeholder mapping. So oftentimes my clients are the chief risk and compliance officers, the heads of AI privacy. The CISOs are coming to me saying, oh my God, I'm having generative AI foisted upon me. Like, help me figure out how to establish the safeguard rails. What do I do? So a lot of the effort is helping them determine like, who are the stakeholders within your organization that need a seat at the table when it comes to things like what is being communicated, what training is in place, who needs to be at that AI ethics board? Is it diverse? Is it inclusive? Does it have enough power to shut down projects? Does it have teeth? Is there a rotating leadership model? Are there whistleblower protections? Like all of these kinds of strategic questions. This is ways in which we kick off organizational AI governance at the client level. But at the very beginning, there has to be awareness as to what is this space of AI ethics or responsible curation of artificial intelligence, because fundamentally, as I said earlier, people fundamentally don't understand the subject of disparate impact. And so education, communication is also needs to happen in parallel with this stakeholder mapping and determining like what are the as-is processes in place now, what's the gap considering new regulations that are coming down the pike. The EU AI Act was already mentioned, as was the New York City law. Like, is the organization compliant currently? What needs to change to make sure that you've got the right processes in place to make sure that you're compliant moving forward and that you're not causing harm either to your brand or to the communities that you serve?
All good points. Any follow-up comments from the rest of the panel?
Yeah, I'm curious. That's great. And I totally agree. As someone who's worked in large multinational organizations, that sounds like the right thing you would follow and set up. However, the challenge I see is, how will this work if you're in a smaller group? I've worked in a lot of startups. You don't even have all of those committees. You don't even have all those people. You're lucky if you have a compliance officer. Are they just part-time? Your legal staff might also just be part-time. how do you really make this, and I bring this up as a challenge or comment for everyone, because this is moving so fast, not everyone can do that because they don't even have the funds or to fund the people to do all of those right processes or procedures. So there's also, I guess, a challenge to those setting up these guidelines or rules to think of how you can scale it in a manner that somebody could really align this or apply it. If they're a group of a few developers working on something, creating this, I mean, even fintechs, they're more tech heavy than they are business heavy generally, right? So when you're in a tech heavy organization, how will that be something that you'll see put in place, enforced, and really acted upon? Curious for others.
I think it's an absolutely fair statement and question. I would add that I would opine there's so much opportunity for startups and small businesses to really innovate in the space of responsible AI, really innovate. For example, I mentioned things like, pairing large language models with something like ontologies in order to make them auditable and explainable. There aren't really great tools to develop ontologies for the lay person. Like, I would love to be able to see a whole suite of tools such that a librarian could say, I'm curating this ontology for this particular domain based on data sets that I trust, right? And have librarians be sort of the AI sentries. I mean, how fantastic would that be? I'd say also in terms of like startups and small businesses being able to do AI governance similarly, as I said, with larger institutions, what are the principles that they stand behind? And then use things like, for example, design thinking frameworks, which have very little to do with the tech, to think through like, what is the primary intent for this particular use case of AI? What are secondary and tertiary, potentially unintended effects? And then given these unintended effects, what are the values of my organization? What are the rights of individuals? And how would I design in order to mitigate for any harm? And again, this is not technical. I've done this with middle school kids. I've done this with high school kids. Like, just getting practitioners who are working in AI to think in this way, I think can really help us to push towards the ultimate goal of having artificial intelligence better reflect the communities that it serves.
Any other comments? So I have a quick one. This could go out to anyone. What efforts can be made to educate and upskill the workforce in all of this? So we've got a workforce that's seeing a lot of stuff in the news. A lot of them are afraid. How can we educate them and upskill them and make them not be afraid?
I have lots to say on this, but I'll let somebody else go first.
I'll ask what kind of fear you had in mind, because there's the fear of your job going away. There's the fear of being, treated unfairly. Which fears were you thinking about?
All of the above. People are thinking their jobs are going to be taken away. Then, of course, you mentioned sci-fi. People have seen those sci-fi movies, and not all of them have good endings. So there's a lot of fear in general. So pick a fear and just answer on that one fear.
I'll pick an easy one. I don't believe that AI wants to take over the world and kill the human population off.
That's about half the blockbuster movies right there.
Yeah, I don't believe it has these ambitions unless you train it into the model from the start. Okay, I took the easy one. Go ahead, please.
I'll say, I'm also going to take it kind of high level. I would say you should look at it more as an enabler rather than a replacer is a way of looking at it, because use AI in a manner where it can help you do whatever your role or function might be, do it better, do it faster, but of course, knowing how it's applying to something and how it can make it easier. I already see this in a boot camp that I've taught on digital marketing, where the students are constantly playing with it because, of course, AI and the digital advertising and marketing side is like on fire. So they're always trying new things, whether it's copying a celebrity's voice, writing copy for them, whatever it might be. And if they can do that for free, that's going to stay ahead of those who are, quote, controlling it right now. Everything from imagery controls, voice, writing, copy, all of that. So figure out how it can help you do better is the way to look at it, to think of it on the positive light.
I desperately, I'm sorry, you can go ahead, go first.
Because we are at this a bit of a sci-fi, which you mentioned, there's also, of course, the concept of artificial general intelligence improving itself recursively, which of course raises intriguing questions. But I think it ties into what it was said before, that actually, if we train it correctly, it will improve itself to serve us better versus become the enemy.
I would very much like to see the subject of artificial intelligence being taught in social studies classes. I'd like to see it being taught in social studies classes in middle school and high school. I think it is crazy. We say we need a more diverse group of human beings developing AI. We need these human beings to be multidisciplinary. And yet, if you're lucky enough to take a class on the subject of something like data and AI ethics, you are at a higher ed institution and you've self-categorized as a data scientist, a machine learning scientist, or a computer scientist, and not everybody else. I fundamentally do not understand this. So if we could, I often get asked the question, what can I do if I don't feel like I'm in a position of power, but I deeply care about the subject? One thing that you could do is help us fight for more inclusive and accessible education on this topic in a multidisciplinary, holistic fashion, not just in the School of Computer Science or Data Science or the School of Engineering, but indeed something truly multidisciplinary. And I would opine even earlier in people's academic careers. Like the design thinking exercise I described earlier, like I said, we've done this with middle school kids. So there is no reason why we can't introduce the subject of, unconscious bias proliferating into our data set early on in people's academic careers.
I completely agree with you, and incorporating it into the curriculum. I've heard way too many schools. I have children that are school aged, so I've heard of way too many schools that are banning the use of artificial intelligence rather than looking at it as how can we use this within our education program as a tool. So I think you are spot on. So let's go on to the next question, which is looking ahead. So what are this is always the most fun part of the panel discussion. Like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, what are your predictions for the evolution of artificial intelligence in the financial industry? And how will the responsible and fair AI contribute to that development? So I'll open it to anyone who is just gung-ho and really wants to start talking about it.
I think we already tackled it, but we just started to talk about that future. And I will have a lot to say, but I'm not going to say it all. I will only say the most, let's say, outrageous ones. And that is, it can be as much as that we will do away with the financial system altogether, like a Star Trek kind of society. Our CEO, Dr. Ben Goertel, is working together with one of my colleagues on a book called The Consciousness Explosion. And I think this ties in very much to the principles and values and how actually we educate each and every one of us. So I think what we need to do, and hopefully by that time we will already have become that advanced human being which can only develop things that are beneficial for humanity with the help of artificial intelligence. So I envision that future, and in that future, maybe, yes, we will have other kinds of value exchange. It can be maybe time, it can be love, it can be support, it can be flourishing we are working on a game with the Earthwise Center. It's called the Earthwise Game for Civilizational Transformation, and they have various archetypes like a wellness coder or well-being coder, and so on and so forth, and other kinds of values, yeah, like originality, creativity, love, and so on and so forth. That is the world where I want to coexist with the singularity and the most advanced artificial intelligence.
Wonderful. Who wants to go next?
If I look into my crystal ball for the future, if I look to the past, ever since the industrial evolution, it's been cheaper to replace humans by automation where feasible. And I think we'll see the widespread adoption in the next few years of these immature tools, because immature tools for text generation and analysis. It's not the same thing. I think those systems will continue to improve rapidly, but I do foresee quite a lot of backlash because there will be horror stories, and I think there will be quite expensive job loss of the kind of jobs that couldn't be automated before but can be automated now. I also recommend that for any important decision that a human remain in the loop. In other words, that a human review whatever the heck it was that this newfangled system produced, whether it's a decision on a loan or even a routine report that's being produced by a system. I think for now, a human needs to stay in the loop. And we've been talking a lot about fairness and accountability and explainability, but there's also the matter of hallucinations. And that's just the system not intending to lie, but it just makes up stuff because it has no foundation to work from that would allow it not to make up stuff. So we need a human in the loop to watch for such things for this foreseeable future. I think not forever, but for now, we need that. And then the bad thing that comes with job loss, of course, is societal instability, and people get very angry.
So how can financial institutions or any organization, and for that matter, rebuild or strengthen that customer trust because there's going to be a lot of learnings along the way. How do you rebuild that trust as you make mistakes?
I can jump in there, having worked in places that have gone back and forth from the reputation perspective. And I would say they need to have their approach be as holistic as possible from the beginning, understanding those regulatory measures they need to follow, the risk that's there, and how they need to do responsible AI development, however they're doing it, from ethic perspective, offering credit, offering access, whatever it is, but they have to really look at risk versus reward. And I predict that the larger, especially all of those that are public and more tightly regulated financial organizations or anything like even insurance, they will be forced to have to keep the human component in there because of those biases, as well as the fines that are going to come. And I think the regulatory bodies are moving. I think EU is moving faster than others, but others are accelerating. But I think a challenge is which group they're staying with, because I see these different industry leaders creating their own AI governance bodies that are kind of within their own little sector. So maybe say big tech, insurance, banking, regional. So how can we find a way that is something that interconnects all of them so that hopefully things that we do figure out and understand, this can then be applied to all for that benefit? Kind of optimistic, but I hope that prompts some other comments.
And to tack on to what she just said, I would say I would love to see those financial institutions rewarded by the market if they do the hard work. And a way that they could be rewarded by the market is by making the audits of their AI models transparent through ESG reports. And I know ESG reports were already mentioned. If they are audited by a third party, and we can talk about third party auditors ad nauseum, right? Let's make those transparent. Do something like an ESG report so that we as consumers can say, I'm picking this bank instead of this bank because I can see that their AI models have been audited for bias and that they're reflective of my worldview on fairness, as an example. A second thing that I would love to see within the future is artificial intelligence as a personal advocate. I'd love to have, like, for example, AI be able to review contracts and say, given your situation, you might want to consider the following things. This might not be something you would want to sign. And I know that there's been a lot of improvements in that area, but being able to have, AI as your own personal advocate, your own personal coach, et cetera, again, based on what you value and your own situation, I think, again, can have AI better reflect the communities that it serves, back to that original intent.
Yeah, I agree. I see AI becoming more of a standard practice tool. I personally don't see AI taking over the world, because I think you're right. You have to program it in there to take over the world. It's not going to just do that. So I think it's a really good tool to use, and that's what I see. I don't see AI taking over jobs. I see people with AI using AI as a tool, possibly having a competitive advantage. But again, I'm just the moderator, right? So in any case, this was a fantastic discussion. Is there any other final comments that you perhaps feel you didn't get in, and you just want to just make sure that it's known? Oh, we've said it all. I don't see any questions from the audience either that we missed.
This was a great conversation. Thank you for moderating.
No, thank you. So just some closing statements. So as we draw the close of this panel discussion, I want to thank you all for just this great discussion. This was awesome. The fact that it was an all-woman panel is even better. Celebrating women in tech and women in AI. I think this group is very underrepresented in the industry as a whole. So I think this is awesome. And one more comment I want for the audience, just a little bit of advertising here. We do have a Chicago AI conference that's coming up in October. I encourage you to take a look at the conference, join us. This conference promises to be a very comprehensive exploration of the AI landscape. We'll be going over industry use cases, ethical considerations, and I think there's even going to be an AI startup pitch competition, if I'm not wrong. But again, please take a look at that. So with that, I will close this discussion. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.